welcome to the next edition of the Horizon series. We're really happy to have Dr. Clarissa Rios Rojas with us today from Cambridge University, the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. And we'll be talking about global catastrophic risk and policy. So welcome, Clarissa.
Hello, Anne. It's a pleasure to be here and great to see you.
Nice to see you too. I think we should start. You're studying global catastrophic or existential risk. Maybe we should define existential risk versus a catastrophic risk, because those terms are used. Well, existential risk is sometimes misunderstood, and we don't. I know you're not just studying risks that will wipe out civilization, but let's hear your definition of those terms.
Yeah, so the difference will be that an existential risk will be an event that will bring society to collapse to a point of no return, whereas the global catastrophic risk will do the same, but in the impact will be high, but there will be a point that at least we can recover from.
So when you refer to policy regarding existential risk, if it's a point where there's no return, obviously you're looking to prevent reaching that tipping point. And would you think that policy approaches would be different as opposed to catastrophic risks that might have really devastating impacts, but we will be able to recover? It just might be difficult. So would you say those are very different approaches to policy in those cases?
No, because both are focused on what may happen in the near future, and they are also focused on future generations. So in terms of policy, there is no distinction between both. We put them or talk about them and discuss them together.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about how you and your center looks at how you intersect science and policy on those big issues? What kind of approaches are you using?
Yeah, so at the center, we are a very diverse team. I'm a molecular biologist myself, and then my colleagues are philosophers, economists, experts on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and also experts on biodiversity and lawyers. And what we try to do is look at these type of events and then try to think about solutions that come from all our different points of view. And then when we talk about policy, what we are trying to do is to interact with three different type of stakeholders. One will be everything related to government institutions. The second one will be companies in the industry. And the third one will be civil society. So sometimes we also work with NGOs, and we support them in a variety of different things. For example, one can be for a tech company that they reach to us in order to understand better about artificial intelligence values and how they can write up an ethics an ethics guidance for the new tech company. In relation with government, we have been advising sometimes to the cabinet at the UK and to different other governments or international institutions like the WHO or the UNDRR, United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office. And when we talk about civil society, there is one interesting project that I have been talking about in one of the reports that we have, that it was about how the civil society can unite and then support the Biological Weapon Convention of the United Nations. And that was an initiative that was happening in the UK with academics, industry, NGOs together, trying to see how we can understand better the convention and then come up with solutions that can support it.
Right, so I wouldn't say, I'm surprised you put those in three buckets. Do you do work as far as looking at how to deal with catastrophic risk by combining those efforts together? I mean, can you talk about that?
Yes, one point that I always raise is that we can have the best facts and the best probabilities and numbers to give to policymakers, and then maybe can agree with them and understand what's the importance of taking care of these issues now in order to prevent them or mitigate them if we are a little bit too far away. But the other part is, how do we understand citizens and how they are going to understand this type of risks and how they are going to react to policies that are related to this. And that's something that has been very that come to our attention, especially during COVID, because there were not very like crazy policies that were implemented. They are policies that you can think of, but still people was very reactive to them, and they had protests and they didn't want to wear the masks or the etc. So I think that's something that the humanities and the social sciences are helping us a lot. So we have, for example, Alexa Haggerty, which is an anthropologist, and she is always supporting us in order to understand also these more social and humanity sides of the things that we are trying to achieve. Other thing that we have been also trying to do in order to catch the attention of citizens in regards of these topics has been to develop comics. We did recently a publication about the future of bioengineering and which are the topics that we will be talking about in 5, 10, 15 years. And in order to reach scientists and policymakers, we did these 3 comics where we had 3 future scenarios of what will happen with this technology if it goes really well or if it goes really bad. And with that, we're also aiming to to get their attention and make that everyone at dinner talks about these issues. So far, we have translated to Italian, Spanish, well, and English, but we are expecting to translate it into more languages.
So speaking of scenario development, can you go a little bit more into who is involved in those, in developing the scenarios themselves, and in for a particular risk? Do you just have best case, worst case, or do you develop several iterations of different scenarios depending on different trajectories?
Right. So in TCER, we have been doing different type of approaches, but the one that has been the most successful one is the one when you have an expert elicitation and you bring different minds together in order to think about the future scenarios. So there is one great work that was led by Shahar Abin, and it was related to artificial intelligence and the misuse of it. So they brought policymakers, academics, even funders of different projects together in order to think about that. And they have produced a report, and that report has been widely used, and they have got a lot of attention in order to understand more about the future scenarios. Another thing that Shahar also does is gamification. So he's now, for example, testing a new game related to AI. And the aim is to bring it to governments in order to train the staff or to help them to think about these different future scenarios that could happen with the misuse of one particular technology, in this case, artificial intelligence. Then in another project that is also interesting is the one that Luke Kemp is doing. And he's together with me in this project called A Science of Global Risk, where we are thinking about how to create a framework that supports the development of a science for this type of global catastrophic risk. And the part of his work is very focused on foresight. Mm-hmm. So with him, we have done some workshops with the Institute for Public Policy in London. He's also supporting the WHO, the World Health Organization, on doing this foresight exercise for them to also think about the future. What are the things after COVID that the WHO has to think of and take care of? And yeah, I think foresight methods, we are trying to innovate in that sense and see how we can tweak some of the methods and have best, most successful cases.
So, I mean, the gamification sounds really interesting, and it might quite easily lend itself to the AI type scenario. You use that for other types of risk. And I'm also wondering if any of those gamification techniques are used for the public understanding, or is it just used for policymakers? We've done the same type of thing working with policymakers and gamification, and it's a very good way to get people to perspectives. So curious whether there are any of these, how they translate to a public understanding or forms to relate to the public.
Yeah, I think that's definitely in their minds, because if it's useful for policymakers, it's useful for any other type of experts. And I'm thinking that they will be aiming to bring it to citizens. And I hope that I can see that, so I can be playing with some friends of mine that are interested in the topic,
Mm,
and they are asking me a lot of questions about that. So it will
mm.
be a nice way to discuss and think collectively, because we are also trying to increase our citizen engagement initiatives. So that will be, I think, one of the easiest ways to start.
So how important do you see things like national risk registers, or, I mean, obviously there are global, you're looking at a global scale, but relating those also to national risk registers and public versions of those so that citizens are aware of those risks. What is your thinking on things like risk registers?
I think that they are a really great idea, because it brings from up to down exactly what the country is more interested on and what their priorities should be. For example, when we talk about global catastrophic risk with someone in Philippines, in my case, it's very different when I talk with someone in the Netherlands. Maybe in the Philippines, I focus more on extreme consequences of climate change and loss of biodiversity, but here I will be focusing on other topics like cybersecurity, bioweapons, and so on. So I think the national registries really bring that up, make a priority of low impact, high impact risks, and then it brings to the attention of their own people, policymakers, and citizens. Because one thing that we understand now is the global catastrophic risk is understood quite differently depending on which part of the world you are from.
Yeah.
And that's something that we have to take into account every time that we talk about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to think about what the values are. I mean, a risk is a concept of our understanding of what matters to us. You know, if it's a catastrophic risk and it's going to kill thousands of people, it's going to matter to everyone. But what they see as important and what they can actually action might be different as well. So there's a point too about these really big risks that how they're talked about needs to be in a way that you can imagine something can be done. There's some policy action that might change it, or people might just go, we can't do anything about it. We're going to put that aside because that's something we can't control. So do you see a way of categorizing risks or talking about them in a way that suggests there's something that can be done if that's the case?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the maybe the best example and the most successful one in a global level has been all the organization that is around climate change, having the COPs, having the IPCC. I think that that's a model that we can copy. Still, however, we realize that we are not there yet, even having all that. So we have to think innovative ways on how to do it for the rest. With artificial intelligence, I know that the Global Partnership for AI has been created and includes many different governments and different institutions that are trying to do something different. But I was talking with one of the greatest minds, I would say, in AI, and what he said is that he believes that it's gonna need a lot of support, because it may be repeating of global governance from other organizations that are still stuck and are not moving as fast as we should, because technology is developing really fast. So one of the things that he suggested to me was to think about mechanism design, and that implies that I have to talk with more engineers to understand these concepts, and maybe we can bring these new ideas from engineering into global governance, which I think is quite interesting if it's going to allow us to do more innovative ways to think about how to monitor and regulate at a global level these type of technologies.
So that brings us to a pretty important point. I mean, pretty much all of these things, if they're a global catastrophic risk, they really will require international cooperation and governance to deal with them. And how do you see that going, or what do you think about the prospects of that in the current situation where the multilateral system is a bit weakened. And so even things like the IPCC, there are these institutions and mechanisms to look at big risks like climate change and Sendai framework, but in a world that is a bit fraught at the moment, and COVID not helping that, and the geostrategic tensions that are occurring at the moment, what do you see as the prospects for getting any new policies or getting traction on these things to handle such global risks?
I think that we have to do a really holistic approach, and that it may take some time, but I believe that is the only way to move forward, because we can use this tragedy that we are living now with COVID-19 as a learning lesson. And maybe we can introduce this type of learnings into, I would say, secondary school, university level, and then just to explain what happened, how different actions taken by citizens help this, or delay, for example, how many vaccines were introduced or were inoculated. And at the level of university, to have more masters and maybe PhD programs related to global catastrophic risk, I think it will also help in order to shape the minds of the future decision makers. And then at some point, I hope maybe in 5-10 years, we can have like a united concern about this type of events. At the moment, I feel that working with governments has been really good. Some of them are very open to new ideas. For example, in the UK right now, we're working with Lord Bird, which is pushing for the bill of future generations. And some weeks ago, we have been going through each of the different parts of this law and thinking about if we're going to have like a committee of parliamentarians that are going to be assessing new laws, and if these laws are thinking about 25 years in the future about what's the impact that it's going to have in future generations. And then if besides these parliamentarians, we should also have another body that is shaped by citizens, by academics that are also supporting any new changes in the law. And then there is another part that is talking about what's the role of the industry, if we are also going to be pushing to create some committees for future generations in each industry, and then have them monitor every year, every some couple of years, to see what are their initiatives in towards that. And there are some, I'm assuming that in New Zealand you also have like something like that with future generations in the institute that you are leading, the No Future Studies.
Well,
and
I think that's a great point, and I love it. And it's I was going to start asking this long-term view that is really necessary. And I've seen writings about what you're talking about, your parliamentary committee or whatever it's going to be for future generations. And there are some countries that have a committee that's specifically looking out and setting policies for the very long term. Here in New Zealand, we have a Maori worldview. Our Indigenous people have a very long term, hundreds to thousands of year view of how they think about the future very collectively. But New Zealand in general does not. And we want to take on some of those ideas, and completely we would support much more long-term thinking. I mean, our center does try to encourage that and work with government to start thinking much further out. We now do have, only as of recently, have a climate change commission similar to the UK, which is meant to set policies much beyond the political cycle. And that is a really important factor here, particularly for these really complex risks, and having that long-term view. So this is what you're saying, is this is happening in the UK. Do you know of links to other countries in terms of doing that on a global scale?
On a global scale, Not on a global scale, but because of this, I learned that many other countries already have these future generation bills. In Finland, I also see that they have a committee, and I was very impressed because first of all, I didn't know about this, but now because of this work that we are doing with Lorber, I learned about that. But at the global level, I cannot think of. Yeah, I know about efforts. For example, in CCR, we're thinking about how to do a global effort in order to think about the long-term consequences of different technologies that are appearing now. And I know that there are different institutions like yours, and there is the Future of Humanity Institute in United States, the Center for Future Intelligence that is a partner organization of us, the Future of Humanity in Oxford, and recently I was in interview on a podcast in Peru, and they are also working a lot on foresight. And also some months ago, I received training from the government of Canada on foresight. So I think that all these offices that are dealing about long-term view will be called foresight offices or the centers for the future. And I saw also one in Singapore. And it looked quite attractive, and I think that we're moving forward to that. And I hope that this vision spreads around the world faster.
I think it would be quite interesting if more countries, I mean, UK is doing it, to set up an actual parliamentary or, a government arm's length commission that can set laws for that country for the very long term, that goals that have to be met, and then potentially linking those. So we're at an early stage of that, that countries are still sorting those long-term goals and processes out now, but we can be hopeful that eventually, I mean, your center and others could help to link those together on a bigger scale for these big risks.
Yeah, definitely. That's our aim.
Okay. Is there anything else? Any other particular? I guess you've talked a lot about AI. I'm curious as to the other big risks that you think are amenable to your types of foresight and policy linking that you're working on now.
I think that anything related to genetic editing, the use of the CRISPR, which is this tool to do gene editing, it's gonna be it has to be in our minds in order to understand it better, understand how the business are using these techniques, also in order to produce different services for citizens. For example, I know that we all know about these ancestry kits that you send a saliva sample and then they tell you are 30% Mexican, 20% I don't know, Norwegian. But there are also some risks associated to this that may not be a global catastrophic risk, but risk still. For example, related to confidentiality. Do you own your data? Can they sell your data to third parties? And also in the world of cryptocurrency, they have identified this problem, and now they are allowing citizens to sell their own genetic data and don't have a middleman. In this case, like they will be this type of companies, and now you can have a DNA coin on crypto and have like an economic life in this world. So there are many things that are not widely discussed among citizens, and I think it will be important. And bioweapons, for example, we have seen what a natural virus can cause. So what will happen with a human engineer virus is created in a laboratory? What will be the scale? How can we control it? How can we prevent it? And of course, the third example will be, or the third area will be the unknown unknowns. What we already don't know that is going to happen, and which other new technologies are going to appear, and are we already thinking about those type of risks? So yeah, I think those three things. I think AI, biosecurity, bioweapons, and then the third one will be like the ones that we don't know yet, but I'm constantly following future trends and trying to think about this every day. So I hope that together with all the people that is following these trends, we can be ready to identify them on time.
A lot of those do relate to technologies. And of course, that's a really big area. We can see that you might not describe it right now as, oh, this doesn't look like an existential risk. But if we are thinking about all the scenarios and all of the links and the compounding effects of these technologies, if we don't have any control over them in the future, we don't know. That it's an unknown, but it's something that we still do need to follow in that way.
We actually did. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we actually did also future scenarios for the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. There is one part that is called Frontier Risk, Foresight on Frontier Risk. And one of these scenarios was also that some companies were using the DNA data that you provided to these DNA testing companies, and then based on that they were doing recruiting, or they were giving different health insurance premiums depending on what your genetic code is saying, that you may be having diabetes in the future and so on. So it sounds crazy at the moment, but it's a good exercise for thinking what could happen if this is leaked, if my DNA data is leaked, or if the companies are hacked, and who is going to be having my genetic code in the future and how it's going to be used.
Yeah, so that brings us to sort of a question of ethical, not only ethical uses of technologies, but ethical responsibilities in risk assessment itself. Does it bring up exposing these risks, or do you see what the ethical responsibilities around the assessments and methods that you're using? Do you have any thoughts on that to wrap up?
Yeah, CSER is really big on AI alignment, which is related to alignment to human values. How do we create algorithms, or you call it robots, that are going to be not creating more risk for us in the future in order to perform as they should be doing? But there is also a big conversation in the background about what are human values. And I think that's something that in the academic realm, they're also discussing a lot, how to define what are these. The other thing about ethics that comes to my mind is another project that I'm involved in with Jan Flatley, which was the ex-CEO of Illumina. So right now he is developing a platform for the ethics of human genomics. And his vision is to create this website where anyone in the world can contribute with their efforts in their own language, if they want, about the ethics in relation to this issue in their own countries, and then create a community where we can discuss about these issues and see how we can move forward. And this initiative is not just for academics or citizens, it's also for the industry. And there were many of these companies, like the genetic testing, that also want to be part of that, because they also want to align to this ethical behavior of human genomics. So we already saw how the website looks and how the repository for documents in ethics are going to be uploaded, and there is going to be a group that is going to be curating them, and then there are going to be like 3 levels, and I hope it's going to be launched soon. And I think that's a good initiative as well, to have like a global effort that brings together people very interested on the ethics of human genomics.
Fantastic. Okay, I think our time is just about up, so I will thank you and let you get on with your day. It's early there in the UK. Thank you very much, and we will hopefully talk soon and hear more about your really interesting work. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and I just hope that everyone that is looking at us today just reach out to us, because we both are working on this, what's going to be the future of humanity and the planet. So just reach out to us. We're doing interesting projects, and we always need more hands and minds to support us.